joined by Mr. Price, and we will begin this meeting of the Housing Committee. Mr. Cedillo is on his way, but he asked that I begin the meeting on his behalf. Items 1 and 2 will be continued, so if there are members of the audience who are here to entertain items 1 and 2, we will continue those for a future date. And we will begin with item number, there's no clapping, sir. So we're going to go ahead and maintain order in this meeting. Item number 6 is the one that we'll begin with, and if it's okay, we'll have the clerk read, and we'll take public testimony first.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, would you like to read items 1 and 2 to the record?
Sure, please.
Item number 1 is a motion, Wesson Price, relative to the sale of city-owned real property located at 2444 through 2450 South Crenshaw Boulevard. And item number 2 is a motion, Price Fuentes, relative to abatement of nuisance conditions at city-owned vacant property site comprised of 200 East Slauson Avenue, 5828 through 5936 South Wall Street, and 5829 through 5935 South Los Angeles Street.
And those items are continued.
Very good. That will be the order. We will go ahead and take item number 6 first out of order, and if there are speaker cards, I'd like to hear from members of the public who have got comments on item number 6.
Item number 6, Department of City Planning and Housing reports relative to bringing into compliance illegal, unapproved dwelling units and options for preservation of those units.
Very good. We will begin with, let's go ahead and start with Wayne and Herman.
Yes, so you're going to hold control of this meeting, right? That's what you said to me. Well, one lousy minute to go over this item. What can I say? You're going to allow all of this illegality, all of these additions and crap that they add on to these places, as long as you get your affordable housing out of it. So essentially, it's open season. If you have multi-unit housing, build your illegal structures on the back, then call the city under your anonymous program, ask for amnesty, and then you can keep collecting the rent as long as it's low rental fees. The city's a joke. It's just a fucking joke. It really is. Everybody that complies with the law, they get screwed. Everybody that doesn't wins the day. Just another scam.
Mr. Speaker, for the record, I just want to remind you that is it really unreasonable to allow us just this indecent time of 1 minute under this comment? You're so unreasonable not to accommodate people who spent their day to come in here to address the city's business. So I just want to make sure that you're aware of, violation of the state constitution under the Brown Act. But who fucking cares? So again, illegal, unapproved dwellings is something that is your responsibility to ensure that the public safety at large is protected without the violations committed by developers who illegally commit a crime against the city by the red tape that you allow them to get away with, Mr. Felipe Fuentes, for the record. Not like Mr. Cedillo, who's a good man, who protects the welfare of his council district number 1.
So we'll move on to Ezra Gale, Alex Commissar, and Michael Millman. We've got room for 4 up here, and Earl Vaughn. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Ezra Gale with the Building Industry Association. We represent 1,100 developers and...
If you could speak into the mic, we're having trouble hearing. Very good.
We represent 1,100 folks in the home building industry throughout Los Angeles County. I just want to take the time to thank HCID and planning for the very thoughtful reports that they've delivered to you today. We think this is a very strong step forward to help address housing affordability in the city. It's staggering the number of units that might be able to come into compliance here. The report mentions up to 100,000. Those that obviously don't impinge on life safety at all should absolutely be brought up and brought into the fold of the city to support not only the homeowners, the renters, but the general fund as well. Specifically, we recommend option number 2, which is a by right process. We believe that this will help streamline the process of bringing these units online quickly and in an efficient manner that won't tax any of the department's resources. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alex Commissar, here on behalf of the California Apartment Association, Los Angeles. We're pleased to support HCID's report on an amnesty program for illegal units. Many of these units have existed, as you know, for years, and once they're discovered, the process can be much too onerous to convert them into legal units as it stands now. We're in the midst of an affordable housing crisis, and we believe a defined amnesty period for bringing these units into compliance will be a small but important step in keeping all options for affordable housing on the table, while at the same time not offering an incentive to create legal units. This report was a result of the joint efforts of the RSO working group, we want to point out, and we're certainly proud of these efforts, and we thank everyone who contributed to this process. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, Mike Millman. Yeah, Mike Millman. I wish I could say with a full heart that I adopt and endorse everything in the report. Let's just be completely honest. Santa Monica did this about 16 years ago with a short form, no longer than 1 page, where they granted amnesty. They waived the side and the rear setbacks and the parking, and within, 3 months, converted slightly under, 500 units to make them safe. There was no problem. All this, let's meet in an anonymous group and then come back with the permit and do this or that. This is just busy work. We don't need it. Let's get a few AGLA lawyers up to Mike Fuhrer's office, sit down at a big table, bring some donuts and coffee, work out a simple plan to save these units. And there are some bad players, illegally built them. I don't want to sanction them, but let's slap them on the wrist with some fees. Thank you.
Sorry, there isn't any clapping or disruptions of the meeting. We'll just go ahead and let the entire room know that we're not going to support any disruptions of the public testimony. Mr. Vaughn.
Hi, Earl Vaughn. I'm past president of AGLA. Chairman Cedillo, I have 2 buildings in your district, by the way. We support this proposal. In principle, we've been working on it for a very long time. We think it's a win-win for everybody in the city. We also want to make sure, I want to echo Mike's comments that since the majority of these units that are going to be done by small owners, make it a simple process. Simple parking waiver. Simply addressing the issues of area inside of the units. A simple setback requirement. Make it as simple, transparent, as easy as possible for people to use, considering, like I said, you're going to have smaller owners using it. We want to also make sure that you make it inclusive for our owners to use by having us have a seat at the table while the ordinance is being drawn up with the city attorney's office. I wanted to echo Mike's comments about that. And that's it. We appreciate your work on the project, especially you, Councilman Fuentes. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. We'll go ahead and hear from Joseph Pasugin and Harold Greenberg, and I want to let members of the audience know that Mr. Chairman Cedillo has joined us. Good afternoon, Chairman.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My apologies for running late. I was off campus, as they would say.
Roberto speaking. Good afternoon, gentlemen. I represent the consulting process of this legal process on doing all this illegal dwelling, and I have with me probably about 4 or 5 projects ongoing right now, dealing with building safety and planning, and it's a process. It will take about 1.5 years to 2 years to go with the whole thing. Not to mention all those clearances that needs to be done. But what I encounter in the process is once we got the building got cleared and the planning got cleared, the fire department doesn't want to give us the authority, that doesn't want to give us the go, not unless we need to redo the whole it's a fire sprinkler issue. Even though the building has already an existing fire sprinkler, but they want us to have all the buildings, the whole units, part sprinkler, which is cost about $500,000 to do.
Thank you very much for your comments. Mr. Greenberg.
Harold Greenberg, past president of AGLA. I want to thank not only this committee, but frankly, city planning and particularly the housing department. This is a win-win situation. We have a tremendous housing crisis here. This will not affect people that want to build today. This is pertaining to prior units that are non-permitted. It's a win-win situation. Tenants that have lived there for 30, 40 years will keep their property and living near the possession. Owners will not have to fear what could occur. This will be a waiver of parking, setbacks, etc. It will create jobs, and in addition to that, it will mean money to the city because permits are going to have to be pulled. In other words, the amnesty, frankly, is to take care of a situation of properties, to make them legal. We're not going to be adding new units or things of that nature. This is something that will help stabilize the situation and take out the fear that tenants have, that owners have, and we'll all be the benefit for it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Greenberg. Mr. Cedillo, do you mind if I have staff come on up and present their report?
please.
Very good. If we could have HCID come on up and make a presentation on the report. As they're coming up, let me begin by thanking all of the stakeholders who participated in this policy. What we're trying to accomplish here is we're trying to conform illegal units so that we can maintain affordability and try to get folks into stable, dignified housing. And I think that the stakeholders who brought this idea to me to carry as a motion, I'm indebted to, but really it's their efforts that have hopefully have bridged a gap here for housing. And to have owners and tenant organizations work together, I think, is phenomenal. So thank you, Chairman, for allowing me to make those comments, and thank the stakeholders for coming together. If we could have HCID present on what I think is a very, very good report. I particularly enjoyed what it is that other cities and municipalities are doing. I think it's really helpful. So if you could give a presentation, but give me a focus on what San Francisco is doing, because I think, separate and aside from all the other great things that municipalities are doing, they really have a pretty significant model.
Good afternoon.
And the planning department, too, I'm sorry. I think I only invited HCID. Come on up, planning. We love planning.
Let me say just a word before you leave. I know time is of the essence, and so I won't overdo it. But I want to thank you for your leadership on this. It's very important. I want to restate what you stated, but particularly your leadership in stepping forward. We've got a lot of challenges in front of us. This is maybe the low-hanging fruit. I don't know, but it is definitely something that we need to do immediately. And I just want to thank you for your leadership. We do have a win. It appears we have the elements, the critical mass, for a win-win, and it's just simply stepping back and acknowledging the realities that exist in the city. And so I thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Cedillo.
I won't say any more because time is of the essence.
And I forgot building and safety, too, so my apologies. Yes. I just looked at the report, and building and safety, planning department, and HCID obviously are very important parts to whatever potential ordinance, if it were deemed acceptable by this committee and the full council. Very important that these parts are all working together so that we can get it right. Housing?
Okay. Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Jeff Paxson. I'm the Director of Code Enforcement for Housing. And I'd like to introduce Chief Inspector Daniel Gomez, who did the lion's share of the work on this, and I will let him make the presentation.
Thank you, Director. Honorable Council members, our primary responsibility here was to facilitate meetings with the landlord-tenant work group and to report back on the number of units. And I'd like to say it was a successful meeting with the work group and building and safety and planning. They fulfilled their part, and what we have here is with our numbers, if you've, sounds like you've had the time to review the report, we have had 2,560 illegal units addressed, and only 201 were legalized, and that left 1,765 units that were removed from the housing stock in the city. With that said, that means there's merit to pursuing with this, and planning and building and safety joined us on this. And so I'd like to leave it to planning to discuss what San Francisco has done. However, we did find that it was an attractive program, We did find, as we state in our report, that anonymity is an important component because it encourages people to come forward. And with that, I'd like to defer to Matthew Glesney from City Planning.
Can you repeat, what was the balance?
The remaining units that we had removed over a 5-year period were 1,765 units.
Chairman Cedillo, what's helpful too is if you all would draw your attention, there is a graph. It's not numbered, so I apologize, but there's a breakdown of illegal units by council district from 2008 to 2014. Mr. Price, you'll see that you win the grand prize of having 687 total units that were identified by the Systemic Code Enforcement Program, and it just goes down from there. So this is a real significant issue throughout the city of Los Angeles. Some areas are burdened more than others with non-conforming units, and the goal would be that we come up with something that actually will satisfy the building and safety standards and hopefully not disrupt or have minimal impact, as the planning report suggested, on the zoning in an area. So what do they do in San Francisco?
Thank you, council members. My name is Matt Glesney with the Planning Department. I work in our citywide policy section. Sure, I'll jump right to San Francisco. We looked at a number of cities. San Francisco is probably the latest to have gone down this route. And they actually did two things. They did a citywide ordinance that essentially said every multifamily building can get one extra unit beyond what is permitted. And then you do have to meet all the other zoning codes. Except I think they made an exception for certain light and air requirements. And they said basically took it out of the variance procedure, where normally, just like Los Angeles, if you're one over your allowed number of units, in Los Angeles you have to get a zone variance. In San Francisco you had to get a zone variance. They basically just said, okay, you could have that one extra unit if you meet everything else. And then they went a little further in the Castro district, where they were a little more experimental, and actually allowed the zoning administrator to waive a series of zoning criteria, including density limits, parking, rear yard, and open space. Some other provisions in the report. Happy to answer any questions about that, or I could talk more about what our report was talking about.
So I've got a couple of questions. Yeah. So today, and I'm glad that we have all the departments in front of us here. So today, the Systematic Code Enforcement Program routinely makes its way to multifamily dwellings across the city of Los Angeles. How often do we get to, what's the turn onto sort of buildings? There's a lot of buildings out there. Is it every 4 or 5 years that we get out to a location? Every
it's
10?
Approximately every 4 years.
Every 4 years. So what's so exciting about this proposal, I think, is that we have a built-in system in place already that is doing that systematic approach to human health safety standards in multifamily dwellings. But when we come across an illegal unit, what is it that currently happens today?
Normally, a order is issued, and our ordinance has fairly strict guidelines about how much time we can hold on to a case. So 120 days maximum before it goes through the GM hearing process, to our legal section, and then on to the city attorney's office.
So there's an enforcement aspect to it, but if folks wanted to try to figure out how to get that unit into conformance, they typically will have to get into a zone variance?
That's correct.
And Matthew, what does that cost these days to sort of get into a zone variance, and how much time are we talking to get that exception made for property owners?
Yeah, zone variance is not cheap and not quick. It's one of our higher level of zoning relief mechanisms. I think it's about 10, 11,000 nowadays. Probably it's going to take you at least 6 to 9 months to go through that process. Most of all, it requires a very high level of findings to actually approve a variance. You have to, it's a very strict criteria, and one of them is usually you haven't self-created this hardship, which actually you could argue a lot of these units, if not this owner and owner before, created that. So it's probably not the ideal path or process for these types of units. So that's our report looks at some alternatives that would try to get at some of the same things, a variance, but without the very strict findings and criteria you need to actually approve.
So therein is the rub. It takes a lot more time. Let's say folks had the resources and the wherewithal to get into the zone variance aspect of it, it doesn't satisfy the orders to enforce typically, and so what we end up having is people being displaced and units taken offline. And I think that is the policy that we're trying to remedy here. So understanding that's the problem, what are the recommendations that the committee is, or rather that the report is suggesting that we take on? I've read them, but I think for the public it's important to know what it is that we're trying to potentially approve here today.
Yeah. So our report tried to look comprehensively at the entire issue, not just the zoning issue, but I'll probably focus mostly on the zoning issue because we believe that is the primary barrier. These are different than, say, garage conversions, where you may have real health and safety issues. We believe most of these, not all of them, but most of them, the zoning is the primary barrier. These are usually units created within the permitted area of a building. It's, a converted storage room or a bigger unit made smaller. So they've got the electrical, they've got the plumbing, they've got, basic standards. They may not be at exactly what they need for a habitable unit, but it's the zoning. Yeah.
And I think that's really important. It's within the existing envelope of the building. So it's not as if we're asking units that are separate and aside structures. We're talking about largely things that are within the envelope of the existing building.
That's correct.
Okay.
And so, we talk about, ways to be of greater assistance just from a procedural and process to property owners to help them navigate. We talk about tenant protections. Tenants should not be dislocated as part of this process. Tenants should not be asked to pay to make any necessary upgrades. I think there's widespread agreement on that. I don't think we need a lot of actual code changes to do a lot of those things. But what we do and what we end up focusing on is the zoning. And so what would be a new pathway, basically an alternative to variances. And we provide three options. We do offer recommendation, but we wanted to provide options for the council members. And so on page 8 and 9, you can see those. We kind of recommend either the first or the second option, and they both have this concept of affordability built into it. We took very seriously that these are asking for increases in density, asking for parking adjustments, and that's a big deal. It's a zone variance for a reason. So we looked at existing mechanisms that the state law has passed, that we already do here in the city to give density increases, to give parking incentives, and that's through the density bonus process. SB 1818 offers that for new construction. It actually offers it for rehab, substantial rehab as well, but it hasn't been very well used, and it doesn't apply to smaller apartment buildings. And so we sort of said, let's use that concept already embedded in the law, where we're willing to bend a little bit on some zoning things. There's limits to it. It's not a free-for-all. It's not a waiver of everything. There's 20% adjustments. There's a 35% density adjustment. There's a modest parking incentive built into that. And it's all based on how much affordable housing you're willing to provide, and that's it's based on those formulas that are set by the state. So we like using this existing formula rather than just sort of could be perceived as giving things away or just actually creating things that are more beneficial for people that have done things maybe the wrong way versus the right way. So we like this idea of linking affordability to it to make sure the community benefits sort of in proportion to the benefit the property owner is receiving. So option 1 and option 2 are just different in the way that the process would work. One would be more by right, what we call ministerial, an easier, a quicker process, versus a discretionary process outlined in option 1, which would consist of notifications and possibly hearings and appeal rights and a much lengthier process. They both have their pros and cons. We're looking for some direction from the committee members on which way to go. Obviously, a more discretionary process allows you to look at all the peculiarities that may exist and write particular conditions on a project to alleviate some concerns that may be. On the other hand, a ministerial process offers a lot of advantages, and we believe we can write things into a ministerial process that would make sure there's some check that we're not sort of legalizing some bad situation that's impacting neighbors. We believe we could have a checklist or some kind of minimum base performance standards or that could be written into that and make sure you're not parking on the front lawn. We're alleviating that. You're not in violation of other codes. So we think we could do some of that, but it should be mentioned that the discretionary process where you're inviting the neighborhood out and having all that probably gives you more opportunity to hone in on particulars. But we offer both options. The third option, just very quickly, is would not tie it to affordability if the council didn't want to tie this to affordability. We would just take it out of the zone variance into an existing process called the zoning administrator's adjustment. Different findings, sort of probably more appropriate for these kind of projects, but similar would have a hearing, would have an appeal rights, would have notification, all those kind of things. So we're looking for direction. Yeah, first of all, do we want to tie this to affordability, like the density bonus? And second of all, do we want to pursue a more by right or ministerial approach? And then that'll give us direction to work out all the particulars. But we tried to outline what that would look like.
So I for one, like sort of a bifurcated approach. So the ministerial makes an awful lot of sense to me because we want to maintain the incentive for property owners to be able to avail themselves of this, for lack of better words, this expedited sort of conformance process that we're going to have. But I also want to make it so that, as I said, the incentive is still there for folks. Now, I recognize that the systematic code enforcement program is some incentive. We are going to, at some point, discover units and issue orders if they're not conforming. But I'm also reticent to want to just rely on that as sort of our technique, because nothing prevents people from then bringing a unit back online in the future. And it's not to say that would happen an awful lot, but we do want to create an incentive. So I would want to modify a little bit how it is that we would make this analogous to the density bonus ordinance that we have. And the ways I would want to do that is I want to make it, and again, we absolutely, I think, what we should get in return is some level of affordability. I would like to figure out how to give the property owner the ability to choose which unit, separate and aside from the one that is being reviewed in this expedited process, but give them the ability to maybe there's another unit that makes the sense for them. So some flexibility there, I think, is important. But I also would want to be a little bit less stringent on the income sort of levels. I know that right now it's low and very low for density bonus. I'd want us to investigate moderate to low to give folks some flexibility, because I think that retrofitting affordability, depending on where units are, I think doesn't necessarily subscribe itself to low and very low. We want to maintain affordability through a bunch of different sort of areas. So I'd want you all to look at that a little bit. So let me tell you about the bifurcated idea that I've got. So I think where it makes sense to have a punch list for ministerial action makes an awful lot of sense. But I imagine that you're going to encounter some units that would, or maybe multiple units, that would necessitate more of a discretionary sort of process. And what we want to do, in my opinion, is to make sure that we're not exclusive to just sort of the simple, low-hanging fruit ones. If there's something that's a little bit more complex that maybe should require some discretion, we should probably try to figure out a process for that. So if I had to sort of make an amendment to recommendation number 1, it would be to include the zoning compliance option 2, the ministerial process with affordability and transit proximity, and create a threshold for discretionary process if they don't meet the public benefit checklist that you all will establish. I know that's a little tough to draft an ordinance that way, because you still have to do a little, I think, policy work to help us understand what those thresholds would be. But to me, it's worth waiting for, because we've been going at this now for some time. So with that, at some point I'd like to make a motion to make some adoptions here, Mr. Chair, but I will be quiet and hear what my colleagues have to say.
Thank you for that. You call it bifurcated. I'm thinking of it as a hybrid.
Yeah.
But I concur. And so I'm just, I guess maybe we'll wait for them to give it back to us about what the thresholds are. I want to make sure that, and I agree with you on this question of affordability, that's a whole challenge for the whole city. And so extending the range on that is helpful, and is also, I think, as a matter of course, just dealing with the realities and what's appropriate at appropriate units. So I concur.
Okay.
I'm following your lead on this. Mr. Price?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly appreciate the work that's gone into this and the importance of it. But I feel a little miffed, about the district that has the largest number of these properties seem to have been, consulted the least. And so I just would appreciate a more active role from your office connecting with our office on concerns, issues, ideas, thoughts. I was asking for a briefing on this, and well, gee whiz, we were not really sure. We haven't had a briefing from staff on this. They haven't approached us yet. So we got to do a better job of at least keeping members who want to be supportive, who want to be, we need just to make sure we have the information in a more timely way, in a more thoughtful way. But having said that, Mr. Chair, I'm hopeful that we can move forward with this a comprehensive policy that's going to help us deal with these issues. These homes are real problems in my district, the largest number, as duly noted. And frequently it's not the add-on to the house, but it's the garage that's been converted. I mean, it's that kind of special situation, Mr. Fuentes, I think you kind of spoke to. It doesn't really fit into the regular box. And I think you're right. Our goal is certainly safety, but where we can preserve and maintain and add to the affordable housing, I think we have to. I like the hybrid idea also. I think there's some importance in having some ministerial discretion, but at the same time, we need to be able to have those special situations that call for a one-on-one process, discretionary process. And it's a real challenge, I think. I was concerned, how does this all impact the recode efforts that are going on now as we, again, try to streamline and modernize our codes and planning process? Any ideas on that?
Good question. Yeah, we are redoing our entire zoning code from top to bottom, which is out of date. And the recode process is kind of a two-step process where in a number of years, it's going to take that long to go through it all. We're going to have some new processes and procedures in our zoning code being rolling out with the new code and creating new zones. Those new zones, to sort of replace your typical R1, R2, R3, we might have some different kind of zones with different kind of standards. Those would come online not at the time of recode adoption, but when we do a community planning effort and then basically sub out the zoning. So the old zoning that a lot of these projects fall under or may not meet the exact standards in today's zoning are still going to apply even after recode. That zone's still going to be there until it's physically replaced with a new zone. And then I would think we'd actually probably be beyond this first batch. We're really, we should emphasize this is just looking at units that could show that they've existed in the past. We want to make sure we don't create any kind of incentive to people to do illegal things and get it after the fact because they know about this. We want to make sure. So that's probably going to be far enough in the future that it won't address those. But it would, if it did, it would have to meet the zoning in the future. So we'd have if the new zoning allowed a little more, then you may be legal under the new zoning when the new zoning gets into effect, or you may have the same problem and be able to go through the same process, just have different standards in your zone.
And then finally, Mr. Chairman, I think you indicated that you've been in touch with the landlords. The landlords and tenants, I guess, have been collaborating on this. How about the activists and others? I mean, how many are at the table, and how can we expand that discussion so we can have the discussion once, not a serial succession?
It's been a diverse group of participants in this, and there have been many changes in the people at the table. It's been as broad as we could possibly expect. However, with respect to your earlier comments, we'll invite you or your staff to the next meeting. And if your staff feels that it's necessary, we can invite any other interest group that feels they have a role in it.
Mr. Chair, I've got a couple of observations. So, what I think is important here is that this group of folks who have gotten together, of activists, apartment owners, landlords, tenant rights organizations, have really, I think in large part, have signed off on the idea that we need a remedy to the situation. We have about 2,500 units out there that are quickly have gone offline, and this tally here says that combined, there's 4,400 units or so that we have to be wary of losing. So for me, I think it's important to recognize that this isn't an end-all, be-all solution. Mr. Price, I'm looking forward to working with this committee on trying to address the illegal garage conversions. And when I set out on this idea, my thinking was that we have to begin with the easier of all of the challenges that we've got. And this is not necessarily easy, quote unquote, but it is the easier of all of them, because the next round will be to try to determine what it is that we do with those illegal garage conversions, which many of our districts, including the 7th Councilmatic District, have a lot of. But in the meantime, between here and there, in particular between here and Recode LA and subsequent community plan updates, we're talking significant amount of time. If Sylmar community plan update is any sort of test as to how long it takes, it took 5 years of input, which is a short amount of time in the grand scheme of things to get stakeholders participating, to get drafts done, to get the environmentals done, and then for it to be adopted in council today. Thank you, colleagues and Chairman, for your work on the Plum Committee to make sure that happens. That takes a significant amount of time. So if we don't do something now with these illegal units, we're waiting the better part of 7 to who knows how many years from here. So I would make the motion that we note and file the HCID report, amend the recommendation pursuant to my previous comment, which is to include the zoning compliance option number 2 with a hybrid option that honors the ministerial process as outlined in the committee with affordability and transit proximity, and create thresholds for discretionary process if they don't meet public benefit checklist as to be drafted by staff. I would
Grow your affordability.
Right, and so along with the affordability concept, to give us a range separate and aside from what is current in the density bonus ordinance, to go all the way up to, moderate, maybe the entire scale, so we can see what it looks like. Delete recommendation number 2, and adopt the recommendations of the planning report as amended, would be my motion.
So,
Did I get that right, Susan? All right.
Second.
Very good. I would
Did you get all that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
Motion and a second. Looks like it's unanimous. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
There you go. Yeah, good night. Safe travels.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, we have public comment on 3. Let's take a minute to let that room clear. What is 3? Is this a specific project?
Is there 2 projects?